October 31st, 1917. 4:46 in the morning. A shell hole 200 yards from the ruins of Passchendaele village, Belgian Flanders. Lieutenant Edwin Vaughan of the 1st 8th Warwickshire Regiment lies pressed against the slick wall of a crater filled waist-deep with water the colour of old bronze. He cannot feel his legs anymore. The cold has moved beyond pain into a kind of deadness that frightens him more than the German machine guns chattering in the darkness ahead. Around him, 7 men from his platoon cling to the muddy slopes of the hole, and in the centre, half submerged, floats the body of Private Atkinson, face down, drowned sometime in the night. No one has the strength to pull him out. Above them, the sky flashes white and orange with artillery fire, each explosion sending tremors through the liquid earth, causing the walls of their refuge to slump and slide. Vaughan tries to remember what solid ground feels like. He cannot. For 3 months, since the last day of July, the British Expeditionary Force has been fighting forward across this landscape of annihilation, advancing through a swamp that was once farmland, sacrificing thousands for every few hundred yards of ground that dissolves beneath their boots the moment it is won. They call it the Third Battle of Ypres. History will call it Passchendaele. And on this morning, as dawn approaches through the perpetual rain, Lieutenant Vaughan realizes with perfect clarity that they are not fighting the Germans anymore. They are fighting the earth itself, and the earth is winning. What neither Vaughan nor anyone shivering in the Flanders mud that October morning fully understands is that they are witnessing the birth of a new kind of military failure, one so complete and so devastating that it will reshape how future generations understand the limits of human will when confronted with the absolute indifference of nature. The Third Battle of Ypres will claim more than 475,000 casualties from both sides. It will devour entire battalions in minutes. It will reduce the concept of military advance to a grotesque arithmetic, where 5 miles gained over 3 months represents victory. And it will be remembered not for any strategic triumph, not for any breakthrough or turning point, but for mud. Mud that swallowed men, horses, guns, tanks, and ambitions. Mud that transformed modern industrial warfare into something more primitive and more terrible than anything witnessed in centuries. This is the story of how Field Marshal Douglas Haig's great offensive drowned in the rain, how the British Army marched into a quagmire of its own making, and how the landscape of Flanders became a graveyard where hope itself suffocated in the slime. Act 1. The Illusion of Progress. 3 months earlier. July 31st, 1917, 3:50 in the morning. British artillery positions, Ypres salient, the horizon erupts. For 17 days, British guns have been pounding the German lines, and now, at the appointed hour, they unleash a bombardment of such intensity that soldiers 10 miles behind the front report feeling the earth vibrate beneath their feet. 4,300,000 shells are fired in the preliminary bombardment. The weight of metal hurled at the German positions exceeds 100,000 tons. Standing in his headquarters at the Château de Levis near Cassel, Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig watches reports arrive with the methodical satisfaction of a man who believes he has accounted for every variable. The mathematics of destruction are on his side. For every yard of German trench, the British have calculated the precise tonnage of explosive required to render it untenable. The creeping barrage has been rehearsed until each infantry company can advance in the shadow of their own artillery with choreographed precision. Haig has read the meteorological reports. Summer weather is predicted. The ground is firm. Victory, after 3 years of stalemate, finally appears within reach. He is wrong about almost everything. What Haig and his planners have failed to adequately consider, or perhaps have chosen to ignore, is that Flanders in summer is a landscape held together by an intricate and ancient drainage system. For centuries, Flemish farmers have maintained a network of ditches, culverts, and streams that channel water from the low, flat fields down to the sea. The bombardment that Haig unleashes with such confidence does more than kill Germans. It obliterates this drainage system entirely. Every shell crater becomes a reservoir. Every destroyed culvert becomes a dam. The 4 million shells do not simply tear up the earth. They fundamentally alter the hydrology of the entire region. And then, on the afternoon of July 31st, as 9 British divisions climb out of their trenches and advance toward the German lines, the rain begins. Private R.A. Colwell of the 2nd Battalion, Royal Dublin Fusiliers, will later write in his diary, "The ground was firm when we started. By noon it was porridge. By evening it was quicksand. Men were simply vanishing. The rain that begins on the first day of the offensive does not stop. It falls steadily through the first week of August. It falls intermittently through the second week. It returns with renewed intensity in the third week. Weather records for August 1917 show twice the normal rainfall for Flanders. But it is not simply the quantity of rain that matters. It is what the rain falls upon. The artillery bombardment has pulverized the clay soil of Flanders into a fine powder. Mixed with water, this powder becomes a substance with unique and terrible properties. It is too thick to be liquid, too liquid to be solid. It clings. It sucks. It swallows. Soldiers discover that if they stand still for more than a few minutes, they begin to sink. The wounded, unable to move, disappear entirely. Stretcher bearers report taking 6 hours to move a casualty 300 yards, not because of enemy fire, but because each step requires pulling their legs free from mud that grips like cement. Captain J.C. Dunn, medical officer with the 2nd Battalion Royal Welsh Fusiliers, records his observations with clinical precision. "The mud is not like any mud I have encountered. It has the consistency of thick paint, but weighs like concrete. A man who falls forward cannot push himself up. The mud simply oozes around his hands. I have seen men drown in shell holes no more than 3 feet deep because they lack the strength to keep their faces above the surface." This is the revelation that comes slowly, agonizingly, to the British command over the course of August. They are not fighting a conventional battle. The German army remains formidable, well entrenched in concrete pillboxes on the higher ground, firing down into the British lines with methodical accuracy. But the true enemy is below. The ground itself has become hostile terrain in a way that no military manual has prepared them for. And yet the offensive continues. This is perhaps the most incomprehensible aspect of Passchendaele to modern observers. The catastrophic conditions become apparent within days. Casualty rates soar. Gains measured in hundreds of yards require tens of thousands of soldiers. Still, Haig presses forward. His reasoning, conveyed in dispatches to London, rests on several assumptions. First, he believes the German army is near collapse. Intelligence reports, selectively interpreted, suggest that one more sustained push will shatter German morale. Second, he argues that the British cannot simply abandon an offensive that has already cost so much. To do so would be to render the casualties meaningless. Third, and perhaps most significantly, Haig operates within a strategic framework that does not yet acknowledge the possibility that some objectives are simply unattainable. The culture of the British Officer Corps in 1917 is built on a foundation of will and resolve. Obstacles exist to be overcome. Difficulties are tests of character. The idea that nature itself might impose absolute limits on military operations does not fit within this worldview. Lieutenant General Sir Launcelot Kiggle, Haig's Chief of Staff, visits the front lines for the first time in November, after the offensive has been underway for 3 months. Seeing the battlefield for himself, he reportedly begins to cry, saying, "Good God, did we really send men to fight in that?" The officer accompanying him replies, "It is worse further up." This exchange, recorded by multiple sources, encapsulates the fundamental disconnect between command and reality that characterizes the Third Battle of Ypres. The men making decisions are operating from maps and reports. The men executing those decisions are drowning in mud. Act 2. The Arithmetic of Annihilation. September 20th, 1917, 2:15 in the afternoon. Men in road, British sector. The tanks go in first. 57 Mark IV tanks, each weighing 28 tons, rolling forward across ground that resembles a lunar landscape submerged in brown water. The tank crews are volunteers, men who believe that armoured vehicles represent the future of warfare, that technology can solve the problem of the Western Front. Within hours, more than half the tanks are immobilised. Some sink into the mud until only their turrets are visible. Others throw their tracks attempting to climb the slick slopes of shell craters. Crews abandon their vehicles and attempt to make their way back to British lines on foot. Many do not arrive. The tank, that symbol of mechanical modernity and industrial power, proves utterly useless in the Flanders mud. The offensive reverts to what it has been since the beginning. Men with rifles, climbing out of trenches, walking toward machine guns. The battle for Men in Road, planned as a limited objective attack with overwhelming artillery support, achieves its goals. The British advance approximately 1,000 yards on a front of 7 miles. This is considered a success. The cost is 22,000 casualties. Division the numbers and the arithmetic becomes stark. For every yard gained, 22 men are killed or wounded. But this mathematics, brutal as it is, does not capture the full horror of what fighting at Passchendaele means. The wounded face a particular nightmare. Stretcher-bearers, struggling through mud that reaches their thighs, often take 8 to 12 hours to evacuate a casualty from the front line to an aid station. Men with abdominal wounds, in agony, must endure this journey conscious, fully aware that they are likely to die before reaching surgery. Morphine helps, but supplies are limited. Medical officers make impossible choices. Captain Dunn writes, "A man shot through the stomach has perhaps 4 hours to live without surgery. It takes 6 hours to reach the casualty clearing station. I give him morphine and move to the next man. There is nothing else to be done." The German defenders occupy higher ground, and they have learned. After the initial bombardment in July, German commanders abandon the strategy of holding forward trenches in strength. Instead, they construct concrete pillboxes, some with walls 6 feet thick, positioned to create interlocking fields of fire. These strongpoints, nearly impervious to artillery, must be taken by infantry assault. The British develop specialized tactics. Small groups, armed with Lewis guns and grenades, attempt to flank the pillboxes while other units provide covering fire. It is dangerous, exhausting work. Success depends on coordination, on men moving quickly across open ground, on suppressing German machine guns long enough for assault teams to close the distance. In the mud, none of this is possible. Men move slowly. Flanking maneuvers that should take minutes take hours. The Germans, warm and dry inside their concrete bunkers, simply wait. They fire in short, controlled bursts. They conserve ammunition. They kill with methodical efficiency. And still the offensive continues. Through October, the focus shifts northward toward the shattered remains of Passchendaele village itself. The name becomes symbolic. For Haig, capturing Passchendaele represents vindication, proof that persistence and resolve can overcome any obstacle. For the soldiers ordered forward, Passchendaele represents something else, a place where the concepts of strategy and objective have become divorced from any meaningful reality. What does it mean to capture a village that no longer exists? What value lies in occupying ground that cannot support human life? These questions are not asked in official dispatches. They circulate instead in the bitter, exhausted conversations of men waiting in waterlogged trenches for the order to attack. The Canadian Corps receives the assignment. 4 divisions, commanded by Lieutenant General Arthur Currie, are tasked with taking Passchendaele. Currie surveys the battlefield and tells Haig that success will cost 16,000 casualties. Haig insists the attack proceed. The Canadians go forward on October 26th. The fighting is savage. German artillery, firing from positions that British counter-battery fire has failed to suppress, drops shells into the advancing Canadian lines with devastating accuracy. Men disappear in fountains of mud and shrapnel. Unit cohesion dissolves. Individual soldiers and small groups push forward, fighting not toward an objective but simply away from the killing ground behind them. On October 30th, the Canadians reach the outskirts of Passchendaele. The advance covers approximately 300 yards. Casualties exceed 2,500 men in a single day. Lieutenant Colonel Agar Adamson of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry writes to his wife, "The mud makes it all but impossible to move. Men must be ordered at pistol point to leave shell holes as they prefer to be killed where they are rather than make the effort to advance. I do not blame them. I feel the same." This is what Passchendaele does. It strips away not just lives but the will to continue living. It reduces soldiers to creatures operating on pure survival instinct, men who have moved beyond courage or cowardice into a state where continuing to exist requires more strength than they possess. Act 3. The Price of Persistence. November 6, 1917. 9 o'clock in the morning. The ruins of Passchendaele village. They take it. The Canadian Corps, having suffered precisely the 16,000 casualties that Currie predicted, captures what remains of Passchendaele. The village is unrecognizable. Every building has been reduced to rubble, and then the rubble has been pulverized by continued shelling. The church, once the tallest structure in the area, exists only as scattered bricks half buried in mud. The streets are gone, erased by shell craters that merge into one continuous swamp. Canadian soldiers establish positions in the ruins, digging into ground so saturated that the walls of their trenches collapse as fast as they can be built. They hold the village because those are their orders. Strategically, Passchendaele means nothing. The Germans withdraw 200 yards to prepared positions. The front line shifts slightly. No breakthrough occurs. No collapse of German morale materializes. The offensive, having consumed more than 400,000 British and Commonwealth casualties, simply stops, not because objectives have been achieved, but because continuing has become physically impossible and morally insupportable. Field Marshal Haig issues a statement declaring the offensive a success. The British have advanced approximately 5 miles on a narrow front. They have captured strategically important high ground. German forces have been attrited and weakened. These claims are technically accurate and substantively meaningless. The real accounting happens in the casualty clearing stations, in the hospitals in England overwhelmed with shattered men, in the villages across Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa where telegrams arrive informing families that their sons, husbands, and fathers will not be coming home. The psychological impact on survivors defies easy categorization. Men who endure Passchendaele do not speak of it the way soldiers speak of other battles. There is no romance in the retelling, no sense of shared ordeal that builds camaraderie. Instead, there is silence. Veterans of the Third Battle of Ypres often refuse to discuss their experiences, not from modesty or trauma alone, but because the gap between what they witnessed and what language can convey seems unbridgeable. How do you explain to someone who was not there what it means to watch a friend drown in mud? How do you describe the smell of a battlefield where thousands of corpses lie unburied, slowly dissolving into the landscape? How do you convey the particular horror of artillery fire that buries men alive, entombing them in mud that sets like concrete around their bodies, leaving them conscious and aware as they suffocate? The failure at Passchendaele forces a reckoning within the British military establishment, though this reckoning occurs slowly and incompletely. Some officers, including Currie and other Canadian commanders, argue forcefully that the offensive should have been abandoned in August, that continuing represented not determination but criminal negligence. Others, including Haig himself, maintain that the battle served essential strategic purposes, tying down German divisions and preventing them from redeploying to other fronts. This debate continues through the winter of 1917 and into the spring of 1918. It is largely resolved not through reasoned argument, but through events. In March 1918, Germany launches Operation Michael, a massive offensive that nearly breaks the British lines. The crisis requires every available division. The ground captured at such cost at Passchendaele is abandoned without a fight. The Germans reoccupy the ruins. The 5 miles purchased with 400,000 casualties cease to be British territory. The offensive is revealed, in the starkest possible terms, to have been futile. But futility is not the full measure of Passchendaele's legacy. The battle represents something more profound than mere military failure. It marks the point where the inherent limitations of industrial warfare become undeniable. For 3 years, the armies of Europe have embraced a logic that suggests enough artillery, enough men, enough will can overcome any defensive position. Passchendaele demonstrates the falsity of this logic. Some obstacles are absolute. Some conditions render military operations not just difficult but impossible. The British Army, the most powerful military force the world has ever seen up to that point, deploys every technological and tactical innovation at its disposal. Tanks, aircraft, poison gas, sophisticated artillery techniques, highly trained infantry. None of it matters. The mud swallows everything. This realization ripples through the British command structure. It influences planning for the final campaigns of the war. When the Allies launched their successful offensives in the late summer and fall of 1918, they do so on dry ground, with mobility and flexibility prioritized over the grinding attrition that characterized Passchendaele. The lessons, purchased at such terrible cost, are learned, but they come too late for the men who drowned in the Flanders mud. Epilogue, Memory and Meaning. November 11th, 1958, 11 o'clock in the morning, Tyncott Cemetery, Passchendaele, Belgium. The largest Commonwealth War cemetery in the world sits on what was once the German front line. 11,961 graves, arranged in perfect rows across gently rolling fields. The grass is green and carefully tended. Flowers bloom in the spring. It is beautiful in the way that only memorials to mass death can be beautiful, heartbreaking and serene. On this Remembrance Day, 41 years after the guns fell silent, a few dozen survivors of the Third Battle of Ypres gather for a ceremony. They are old men now, in their 70s and 80s. Most walk with canes, some require wheelchairs. They have come from across the Commonwealth to stand once more on ground that tried to kill them when they were young. Edwin Vaughan is among them. The lieutenant who lay in that shell hole on the last day of October 1917 survived the war, though by the narrowest of margins. He was invalided out of the line in December 1917, suffering from exposure and exhaustion. He spent the remainder of the war in hospitals and recuperation camps. He returned to civilian life, became a teacher, married, raised children. For decades he told no one about Passchendaele. His family knew he had served, knew he had been at Ypres, but he refused all questions about the details. Only in the 1950s, reading accounts of the battle that struck him as sanitized and incomplete, did he retrieve the diary he kept during the war. Reading his own words from 40 years earlier, he wept. Then he began to write a longer account, expanding the terse daily entries into a fuller narrative. He titled it simply, 18 Months with the 18th Warwickshires. Standing now at Tyncott, looking across the rows of white headstones stretching toward the horizon, Vaughan struggles to reconcile his memories with the peaceful landscape before him. The fields are drained now. The craters have been filled in. Crops grow where men once drowned. It seems impossible that this place was ever the nightmare he remembers. A journalist approaches him, asks for his thoughts on the anniversary. Vaughan considers the question for a long time before answering. "People ask me if it was worth it," he finally says. "They want to know if the sacrifice had meaning. I cannot answer that question. What I can tell you is that the men who died here were brave beyond measure. Not brave because they charged machine guns, though they did. Not brave because they endured artillery fire, though they did that too. They were brave because they continued to exist in conditions that should have broken any human being, and many of them maintained not just their lives, but their humanity. I saw men share their last cigarette with a stranger. I saw soldiers risk their lives to retrieve wounded comrades from no man's land. I saw kindness and compassion in a place designed to eliminate both. That is what I choose to remember." Another veteran, standing nearby, overhears the exchange. He speaks up, his voice rough with age and emotion. "Passchendaele was a lesson in what happens when pride and stubbornness override common sense. We were sent to do the impossible, and we did it, or tried to, because we were soldiers, and that is what soldiers do. But the men who ordered us forward knew or should have known that we would die by the thousands for objectives that meant nothing. That is the legacy. Not courage, not sacrifice, stupidity, criminal stupidity." The two men stand together in silence, veterans of the same battle, carrying vastly different conclusions about what it meant. The debate continues. Historians argue over casualty figures, over strategic objectives, over whether Haig was a butcher or a commander doing his best in an impossible situation. Passchendaele becomes a symbol, invoked in discussions about military hubris, about the responsibility of leaders to their subordinates, about the limits of human endurance. Books are written, documentaries are produced. The name enters the language as shorthand for futile suffering. But symbols, for all their power, cannot capture the lived reality of the men who fought there. They cannot convey the cold, the wet, the exhaustion. They cannot reproduce the smell or the sounds or the particular texture of fear mixed with resignation that characterized life in the Flanders mud. What remains, ultimately, are stories. The story of Private Atkinson, drowned in a shell hole on October 31st, his body never recovered, his name carved into the memorial wall at Tyne Cot, along with 34,887 other men who have no known grave. The story of the Canadian medic who carried 13 wounded men to safety over the course of a single night, making the journey repeatedly through artillery fire until a shell killed him on his 14th trip. The story of the German machine gunner who held his position for 6 hours against repeated British attacks, then surrendered when his ammunition ran out, apologizing to his captors for the number of men he had killed, saying he was following orders. The story of the tank crew who stayed with their immobilized vehicle for 3 days, firing at German positions even though they knew they were trapped, radioing corrections for British artillery until a direct hit killed them all. These stories, multiplied by hundreds of thousands, constitute the true history of Passchendaele. They resist tidy conclusions. They offer no clear lessons about strategy or tactics. What they provide instead is testament to a fundamental truth about human nature: that ordinary people, placed in extraordinary circumstances, are capable of both tremendous courage and tremendous suffering. That the line between heroism and victimhood is often invisible. That soldiers ordered to do the impossible will attempt it, even when they know the cost. And that the men who give those orders bear a moral weight that no amount of strategic justification can fully lighten. The ceremony at Tyne Cot concludes with the last post, played by a bugler standing among the graves. The notes hang in the cold November air, mournful and clear. The veterans stand at attention, saluting comrades who never grew old. Some weep quietly. When the final note fades, they lower their arms and stand together in silence, remembering. Not the grand strategy or the geopolitical stakes or the historical significance. They remember the mud. They remember the friends who drowned in it. They remember surviving when so many did not, and they carry the impossible burden of that survival. As the crowd disperses, returning to coaches that will take them back to hotels and eventually to homes across the Commonwealth, Edwin Vaughan lingers. He walks slowly along the rows of headstones, reading names, pausing occasionally when he recognizes one. Near the center of the cemetery, he stops at a grave marked with the name of a soldier from his battalion. The inscription reads, "Known unto God." The man has no name, just a regimental number and a date. November 1917. Vaughan tries to remember who this might have been, but cannot. Too many dead, too many years. He places his hand on the cold stone and speaks softly. "We made it through," he says. "I do not know if that makes us lucky or cursed, but we made it." Then he turns and walks away, leaving the dead to their eternal rest in the fields of Flanders, where the grass grows green and nothing remains to suggest that this peaceful landscape was once the closest thing to hell that human beings have ever created on earth. The Third Battle of Ypres lasted from July 31st to November 10th, 1917. British and Commonwealth forces suffered approximately 310,000 casualties. German forces suffered approximately 260,000 casualties. The village of Passchendaele, which gave its name to the battle, was recaptured by German forces in April 1918 and liberated by Belgian and Allied troops in September 1918. Today it is a quiet farming community. The population is approximately 3,000 people. Children play in the streets, crops grow in the fields, and beneath the earth, buried deep in the clay, lie the bones of men from across the world who came to this place and never left. The mud took them. The mud keeps them still. That is the final truth of Passchendaele. Not that war is hell, a cliché that cheapens genuine suffering, but that nature recognizes no difference between the brave and the cowardly, the just and the unjust. The mud swallowed them all equally. And in that terrible democracy of death lies the most profound indictment of the battle and the men who ordered it to continue long after any hope of success had drowned in the Flanders rain.